What began as a routine parliamentary address rapidly spiraled into one of the most explosive moments South African politics has witnessed in recent memory. The chamber was jolted into stunned attention when Freedom Front Plus MP Peter Groenewald rose to speak and delivered an address that was anything but restrained. From the very first lines, it was clear his intent was deliberate and confrontational. With a steady voice and unflinching resolve, Groenewald accused President Cyril Ramaphosa of being involved in clandestine and deeply questionable dealings within the prison system. These were not vague insinuations or rhetorical jabs, they were direct allegations of secret transactions that, in his words, betrayed the trust of the South African people and undermined the very foundations of justice. For a brief moment after the accusation landed, the parliamentary chamber fell into an eerie silence, as if the weight of the claims had sucked the air from the room. Even those seated on the ANC benches, many of whom are seasoned political fighters, appeared visibly shaken and unprepared for the sheer audacity of what had just been said. That silence, however, was short-lived. Almost instantly, Parliament erupted into chaos. Shouts rang out from every corner of the chamber as MPs spoke over one another, their voices layered in anger, disbelief, and outrage. Some members leapt from their seats, gesturing wildly in an effort to be heard above the growing din. Opposition benches seized the moment, breaking into applause and rallying behind Groenewald, while senior ANC figures scrambled to their feet to shield and defend their embattled president. The chamber became a battleground of words and emotions, and whatever procedural order had existed moments before disintegrated entirely. Yet amid the noise and confusion, one thing was unmistakably clear: the damage had already been done. Groenewald's allegations had pierced through the usual political theatrics, leaving the nation grappling with a chilling and unavoidable question. Was the President of South Africa secretly compromising justice for private or political gain? At the heart of Groenewald's explosive claims was what he repeatedly described as dirty prison deals. According to his account, these were not isolated incidents or misunderstandings but part of a broader pattern of secret negotiations and backroom arrangements involving Ramaphosa and powerful factions within the ANC. He alleged that these deals prioritize personal enrichment and political survival over the public interest, involving lucrative contracts, financial kickbacks, and preferential treatment for those with the right political connections. The sums of money implied were significant, but Groenewald stressed that the issue went far beyond financial corruption alone. What was truly at stake, he argued, was control and influence over the prison system itself. If his claims were even partially true, then institutions meant to uphold justice, rehabilitation, and accountability had been reduced to bargaining chips in a ruthless political game. Groenewald painted a bleak and deeply troubling picture of a system in which justice had become a commodity, traded behind closed doors by elites who viewed the rule of law not as a sacred principle but as an inconvenience to be bent or bypassed. Under this portrayal, prisons were no longer neutral spaces governed by fairness and due process but tools manipulated to consolidate power and reward loyalty. The implications were staggering. It suggested that under Ramaphosa's leadership, even the mechanisms designed to protect society from lawlessness had themselves been corrupted, repurposed to serve political and personal agendas. This was not simply an accusation of mismanagement or ethical lapses, it was an indictment of governance itself, raising questions about whether the state still functioned in the interests of its citizens. The ANC's response was immediate and ferocious. Senior party leaders took to the floor to denounce Groenewald's statements as reckless lies, accusing him of fabricating conspiracies and deliberately seeking to destabilize the ruling party. They questioned his motives, portraying him as an opportunist exploiting Parliament as a stage for political drama rather than genuine accountability. Harsh words flew, and denunciations grew increasingly personal. Yet beneath the fury and emphatic denials, there was an undercurrent that many observers found revealing. The intensity of the backlash hinted at something more than simple indignation, it carried the scent of desperation. For if even a fraction of Groenewald's claims were substantiated, the consequences for the ANC would be catastrophic, potentially triggering investigations that could climb to the very top of the political hierarchy and directly implicate the president. As the confrontation escalated, Parliament descended further into disorder. MPs stormed out in protest, while others clustered into tight groups, whispering urgently into mobile phones as though scrambling for guidance or damage control strategies. The formal proceedings of the day were effectively abandoned, replaced by scenes that resembled crisis management more than legislative debate. For viewers watching the live broadcast across the country, the spectacle was both unsettling and illuminating. What had begun as another predictable political session suddenly transformed into a raw exposure of deep fractures within the ruling party and the state itself. It felt less like a performance and more like an unfiltered moment of reckoning, unfolding in real time before millions. The reverberations of the confrontation extended far beyond the walls of Parliament. Social media platforms erupted almost instantly, with hashtags related to Ramaphosa and the alleged prison deals trending nationwide within minutes. Timelines filled with anger, disbelief, and urgent demands for answers. Ordinary South Africans voiced a collective sense of betrayal, asking how much more misconduct they were expected to endure from leaders who had repeatedly promised reform and transparency. For many, Groenewald's words struck a nerve that had been exposed by years of scandal, corruption, and unfulfilled commitments. In a country already burdened by high crime rates, widespread unemployment, failing state institutions, and chronic corruption, the suggestion that even the justice system had been compromised was almost unbearable. This was no longer merely about alleged prison contracts or secret deals. It cut far deeper, shaking the foundational trust that citizens place in democratic institutions. The prison system, often seen as the final line of accountability, represents the state's authority to enforce the law impartially. If that system itself was tainted by political manipulation, then what hope remained for fairness, accountability, or the rule of law? The question lingered ominously in the public consciousness, amplifying fear and disillusionment in equal measure. The situation was compounded by President Ramaphosa's response, or rather, his apparent lack of one. Instead of addressing the allegations directly and decisively, he remained conspicuously silent. With each passing day, that silence grew louder and more unsettling. Some analysts interpreted it as a calculated strategy, a deliberate refusal to dignify Groenewald's accusations with an immediate response in the hope that the controversy would fade. In politics, silence can sometimes function as a shield, allowing a leader to ride out a storm without adding fuel to the fire. Yet for many South Africans, this quietude felt less like composure and more like evasion. In the context of scandal, silence is rarely perceived as innocence. More often, it is read as an implicit admission or, at the very least, a sign of uncertainty and vulnerability. Opposition parties were quick to capitalize on this perception, intensifying their calls for formal probes, parliamentary inquiries, and even judicial investigations into the alleged prison deals. Meanwhile, statements from the president's office offered little clarity, consisting mainly of vague denials and awkward attempts to redirect attention elsewhere. This lack of a clear and forceful rebuttal created a widening gap in the public record, a vacuum eagerly filled by speculation, suspicion, and increasingly damning interpretations from political rivals. As days turned into weeks, the uncertainty only deepened. Each moment without transparency fueled public doubt, and the possibility that further evidence might emerge loomed large. If Groenewald's allegations were to prompt an official inquiry or uncover substantiating details, the fallout would extend far beyond damaged reputations. It could fundamentally reshape the internal balance of power within the ANC and weaken Ramaphosa's grip on leadership. Even if the ruling party succeeded in containing the immediate crisis, the episode had already left a lasting scar on public trust. What became increasingly evident was that South Africa was experiencing a broader political awakening. Each scandal, each confrontation, and each dramatic moment in Parliament was pushing citizens closer to demanding real accountability and meaningful change. The events of that day were not an isolated spectacle but part of a growing pattern that challenged the status quo. Ramaphosa's silence may have bought him time, but it did little to dispel the sense that a storm was gathering strength around his presidency. History, it seemed, was unfolding in real time, and the confrontation in Parliament might well be remembered as an early warning of deeper reckonings to come. For ordinary South Africans, the choice was becoming increasingly stark. Continue tolerating repeated betrayals and unfulfilled promises, or insist on holding leaders accountable for the power they wield. The explosive scenes in Parliament served as a sobering reminder that unchecked power inevitably breeds corruption and that democracy demands vigilance from its citizens. Silence, whether from leaders or the public, comes at a cost. As the political saga continues to unfold, one thing remains clear: the demand for truth and accountability is growing louder, and the consequences of ignoring it may be far-reaching.